3 Occupy Central protest student leaders were sentenced to be jailed for 6 to 8 months. Is the punishment fair? What will be the implications of the sentence? There are critical voices in the Western media saying that the central government is undermining Hong Kong's judicial independence and political freedom. What is the current situation of Hong Kong's freedom of expression and peaceful assembly? The Chinese Foreign Ministry has stated that the governance of Hong Kong is China's internal affair, and any attempt at external interference will not be allowed. What are the obstacles for China in dealing with its own internal affairs? 20 years after its return to the mainland, what are the opportunities and challenges facing Hong Kong society? What should be done to facilitate its further development under the one country, two systems policy?
3 student leaders involved in the Occupy Central protest of 2014 have been sentenced to jail for 6 to 8 months, with wide discussion taking place about the protest 3 years ago and about the future of governance in Hong Kong. Are these sentences reasonable? What is the nature of the rebellious emotion underlying their protests and of the attempts by Beijing to bring congruence to the notion of one country, two systems? To discuss those issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Xu Qingduo, a current affairs commentator from CRI, and Anna Tangen, author and columnist. We shall be talking to Professor Gu Mingkang from City University of Hong Kong. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Question is very simple. What do you think of the sentence?
I respect the ruling of the court. It's the independence of the judiciary organ in Hong Kong. I think everybody should do that. You can have the freedom to comment, to make comments, whatever you like, but do not try to say, there are calling of like a review and release of these 3 prisoners, and also the call of even suggestion of giving them a Nobel Peace Prize. I would say that's not wise.
Oh, that's the most controversial point about the Nobel Peace Prize. But Anna, what are your thoughts about the verdict?
Well, quite frankly, on one hand, we had 79 days in which the economy of Hong Kong was interrupted. There are tremendous hardships that were done to people who could least afford it, small businessmen, etc. So on one hand, it isn't enough. On the other hand, you have this situation where you have these young protesters who seem like kind of idealists who are going up against the system. But remember, this is one country, two systems. And what they have done is in essence say that we reject one country. This is akin to somebody in the United States saying that I want to resurrect the South and we are going to succeed because we want to put it up to vote. This is not Brexit. This is not an orderly retreat from some sort of voluntary union. Hong Kong was taken away from China during a drug war as kind of spoils of war. 99 years later, it had to be returned to China. China made a strategic decision to use Hong Kong as an economic tool in its growth. And that has worked out very well for Hong Kong. Unfortunately, not for everybody in Hong Kong. Perhaps the wealthiest families have done better than those at the bottom. And I think this is the real issue. This is the frustration that a lot of these young people are facing. Unfortunately, they're aiming the gun at the wrong parties. I mean, attacking Beijing is not going to change the realities of a Gini coefficient that favors those who have money.
Perhaps the seeds of mistrust, if not anger, had been planted by the last governor of Hong Kong, Mr. Chris Patten, before he left the territory in 1997. Let me go to Professor Gu for his comments on the verdict. Hello, Professor Gu.
Yang Rui, nice to see you.
What do you make of the sentence? Do you think these 3 guys will enjoy a strong rebound from endless protests in the street after the verdict was granted?
Well, I think I have to divide the answer into 2 parts. First, I think legally speaking, there's no procedural problem for the Department of Justice to ask the appeal court to review the sentence decided by court below. And also, I think the sentence necessary because they supposed to be having the deterrence effect. In other words, to deter further activity as such. I think Hong Kong Basic Law protects lawful freedom of speech, but definitely the violent conduct should not be encouraged. Now, I think you will see many people on the street last night to try to defend those 3 students. That the sentence may not fair or otherwise. I think again, they have the right to protest, and they have the right to express their view. I think the government hear their voice, but I think if the government made the right decision, especially if the judgment is right, and I don't see there's a reason to change the consequence.
Look, here is a different voice, Professor Gu.
Pardon me?
Excuse me, here is a counter-argument about the verdict. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, there's...
no, let me finish. Let me finish. The
Yes.
critical voice says loud and clear, look, the sentence of the 3 student leaders would make them loom larger as an iconic image of the protest movement in Hong Kong, and that wouldn't serve the fundamental interest of the Hong Kong SAR government. What do you think of such a concern?
I think, this is a very critical issues. I think many young people in Hong Kong, they do frustrated because of various reasons, maybe including the economic reason. But I think they need to be educated to install correct legal awareness. In my view, they have been misled by those people who are advocating the civil disobedience. I see many students and many young people, they wrongly believe that the civil disobedience is not guilty and it should not be punished. And this is wrong because legally speaking, civil disobedience is an arguable concept, especially the civil disobedience must satisfy various conditions, including one thing is that there's imminent danger of the imminent danger that the law is not lawful and you cannot use violence.
Thank you so much. I'll get back to you, Professor Gu, in a few minutes.
Yes. All right.
Xi Qingduo, what do you think of this concern that the 3 student leaders who were sentenced to 8 months would become an icon for their followers, and there would be more of such unrest in the streets?
Well, I don't see it that way. I think, this is really a purely legal matter. They forced themselves into this government compound, and well, the guards got hurt. There's a violence. So as we talk about civil disobedience, you are not supposed to get involved in violence, and that should be a last resort against any law that restricts the freedom of the people. Here is not the case. So obviously the government went to the appeal court, and then here comes the ruling. I think if you take a look at what has been talked about by the vice president of the Court of Appeal, he said basically that what they pursued for the second ruling is actually a deterrent element. That is a warning to other young people. If you are not careful, if you say I can afford to disobey the law, and you will be punished. This is supposed to be the deterrent element in this ruling.
I'm going to disagree slightly. I do think that they want to be martyrs. They want to show themselves as somehow sacrificing for the movement. But let's take a look.
In other words, they want to be Liu Xiaobo of Hong Kong.
I don't know if I agree with that, but they certainly want to be seen as martyrs for the cause that they've created. And I think you have to be very careful. I don't know that imprisoning them was necessarily the way to do it. You have to be a little bit more creative. Perhaps sending them abroad, making them do social service, whatever it is, make them recognize that there are consequences. Now, there's a difference between civil disobedience, and I agree with you, and a riot. Initially, it started off very peacefully. But peacefully is one thing, but when you start interfering with the daily livelihoods of the people around you, it is not just civil disobedience. You are causing harm to other people who are not involved in this. And there has to be consequences for this. 79 days when people who were trying to do regular business could not. The violence occurred because the locals started being very upset that these youngsters, even though most of them were peaceful.
And one more question about the democratic process itself in the Western countries, such as the United States. Is it true that they have to hold the demonstration in the designated area and they should behave properly within the circle designated by the cops? If you step out of the circle, you're going to be punished. You're going to be taken to the police station.
Yes, and this is what we saw in...
But in Hong Kong, that's not the case, right?
Well, this is also similar, actually. You know, they got this legal permit, which lasts until like 10 p.m. But at 10:24, around that time, they were still there. And then Josh Wong basically using a loudspeaker to call the people to cross the fence and force them into the gate of this government compound over there.
Well, but more than that, they stayed, they created tent cities, they blocked roads, they blocked access to any of the local businesses. And this is where, you know, my right, even under a democratic system, to voice my concern should not impinge on the rights of others. If my argument is with the government, okay, let me have an area where I can protest, I can set up, I can speak my mind. But that doesn't give me the right to go in and affect the livelihood of people who are not as interested in that. And this is one of the issues that people need to realize. And as far as Chris Patten is concerned, I think it's rather cynical that as he was leaving, he was introducing democracy that the British government had failed to deliver in the previous 95 years that they had been there. I mean, the sign, no dogs, no Chinese, had been the rule, not the exception, for many, many years. And the idea that they had gotten this concession due to their interest in controlling the drug trade within China, it's a shameful period of history. And for him to come out and say, oh, look what we've given you, kind of very, very bad.
Yeah, let me go back to Professor Gu. Hello. Do you think those student protesters 3 years ago wanted to arrest the attention of the international society by mobilizing as many young protests as possible to seriously disrupt the normal life of Hong Kong so that there will be strong interventions from Britain and the United States and they'll win the sympathy from these governments? What do you think of this reason?
I totally agree. I agree the fact that they want, to make the things bigger and to attract more attention locally, but also from international, other countries like UK and the United States. And we do see now the news from USA and the UK, even Germany, talking about this judgment, how unfair or whatever, or politically motivated. So you can see this kind of situation happen. But I think more and more those people who violate the law will be punished. So eventually they will be, they will have to learn the lesson. They know, the demonstration or peaceful freedom of speech is one thing. How to obey the law is another thing. If they don't obey the law, they have to bear the consequence. So I think this will be the situation.
The protest in 2014, Professor Gu, was against the current electoral system. The protesters believe that the candidates nominated can't represent the wishes of the locals and that autonomy, which was promised, hasn't been delivered. What do you think of such accusation?
I think this accusation cannot be supported because, for various things. I think we do see many negative views. They are made on purpose. But I think we should respect the facts and we should respect the truth. Therefore, I think even though they claim so, but we should use more facts to convince other people the real situation in Hong Kong.
Thank you so much. Welcome back. Now, Qinduo, do you think we were discussing why there's been such a strong dissent among the student leaders and their followers 3 years ago, and I believe this feeling and sentiment still persists to a large degree in the territory. Do you think competition from the mainland in areas of education, economy, employment has seriously undermined the opportunity of the locals for their future?
I think there's loss of somehow the psychological advantage over their cousins in the mainland. If you compare the mainland to Hong Kong, previously people in Hong Kong enjoyed this kind of like being superior to their mainlanders in terms of the income, in terms of their jobs, and speaking English even. But nowadays you see the mainlanders are catching up very quickly in terms of speaking English, in terms of the quality education,
but not the
jobs.
behavior of the mainland tourists in Hong Kong. For example, the baby formula, I mean, those young parents, they flocked to Hong Kong and they swept the powder off the shelves in the shopping mall. Such things would easily anger the locals because they were unprepared.
In a market economy, you would be happy to see that basically because you are making more money. But I know different people, different reactions. If you're local residents, you don't like to see this overcrowdedness surrounding your neighborhood. But as a salesman, as the owner of the stores, you would be more than happy to see that. So it's hard to say that is bad or that is good. So it's really, if there's a problem, Hong Kong.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on this one, in the sense that when you have Hong Kong was very different from mainland because of the separation. So when you brought these two cultures together, the Hong Kong would see vast numbers of local, very simple people, mostly farmers, things like that, from Shenzhen and these areas, coming over in droves and buying things up. But it wasn't just that. There was personal habits, whether it was spitting in the streets or children, not going to things. But that's overemphasized. These are your countrymen, and it's very strange how over the last 20 years, all of a sudden you see this force. Prior to Hong Kong coming back to the mainland, most people in Hong Kong said, "I'm Chinese." Now, today, many years later, they don't. And I think a lot of it has to do with this kind of cultural distance they see between themselves, English, education and things like that, and opportunity in the mainland. But I think over time that can be addressed. But the real culprit here is education. When the Chinese
I believe an important part of the education, I wonder if we are talking about the same thing, is much should have been done to decolonialize the British influence and to reinforce the education about patriotism. Now, here is one complaint. Here is a quote from a Chinese scholar describing the young generation of Hong Kong. Quote, "They are aware of their identity as a world citizen and a local citizen, but lack of the awareness as a citizen of our country." Do you agree?
I tend to agree with that. I think, as we mentioned earlier about the lack of education, say, on national conditions, on national history, that's necessary because you want to bring Hong Kong really to be part of China. To be one country, and one country you have two systems. That's perfectly fine. But if you don't have the concept, if you don't recognize there's a one country, and you stress only about two systems and the differences between the two sides, ultimately there will be some problem.
Well, I'm afraid some of the strong voices criticizing the mainland actually targets not the country itself, but the ruling party of the Chinese Communist Party. They don't trust this ruling party in the mainland because of perhaps what happened in 1989. Don't forget, each year, without exceptions, there would be an annual protest in the Elizabeth Park of Hong Kong. Now, maybe these young student leaders were perhaps organizers of such activity each year.
No, I mean, Young Ray, let's get to when I talk about education, these young leaders that we see who are going to jail are the products of the education system that created them. The professors who said this is what the situation is, who continue to taught them. China failed in one very important point, in that it did not dismantle the educational system left behind that was preaching exactly what we're talking about, that somehow perhaps Hong Kong had an alternate future other than being part of China, that there was a different kind of situation where they could elect whether or not they would join into the things. This is not the situation. I mean, and this kind of misinformation is responsible directly. So the people we should be holding responsible on that, all right, are the professors, the teachers who are teaching this alternate reality to these young, impressionable people, and then they went out and acted upon it. You know, the crime is how many professors are going to jail? How many have taken responsibility? How many have stepped forward and said, I should go to jail, not them? They were young, impressionable people who were misled by me.
Well, the civil disobedience was actually, encouraged and by a professor in Hong Kong.
Yes.
And obviously, the professor was free from any punishment from here, but to the students.
Is the phrase of civil disobedience actually copied from India? Founding father of modern India launched this movement of disobedience to win independence of New Delhi. Having said this, what do you think of a response from the Foreign Ministry of regarding Britain? Excuse me. The claim of the Foreign Ministry in Beijing says the Sino-British Joint Declaration is actually just a historical document. It has lost, therefore, the practical significance. This remark has really caused a strong protest from European countries, particularly London. What do you think?
Well, I think it's rich given Brexit. The irony should not escape us. There was a document and they said, no, we repudiate it. But the difference is that there is a way. When you talk about India, you're talking about a foreign colonial presence taking over a country and using it for its own economic gain, right? This is not the situation with China and Hong Kong, where Hong Kong was forcibly taken from China and it was returned. In terms of how the Chinese government sees it, it was always a matter of convenience. They needed Hong Kong during this early period to be a bridge between the West and China. But the need for that bridge is rapidly declining. Unfortunately, even although some in Hong Kong see this, many do not. And they cling to a past that doesn't really exist. I mean, having talked to people who said, I'd rather be a second-class British citizen discriminated against by whites than a first-class Chinese. This is inconceivable to me, to reject your own homeland like that. Now, it's a choice, they can do it, but it really reflects some very, very poor education.
We've been talking about the issue of education, but what about our very close relationship with the elites and the business tycoons in Hong Kong? Now, in this particular regard, I'm afraid some mistakes allegedly have been made by Beijing. We have trusted those super rich guys too much. And these guys are known for the hopeless property development. And the property development fails to benefit majority of the young. Most of them are still living in very much like the situation in Mumbai.
Well, here's the irony of this. If it was controlled by the Communist Party, these guys would not be able to withhold development of large tracts of lands that they own, which are in essence forcing up the price of real estate. So they're complaining against a system that could actually provide a solution to many of their problems as it goes not to jobs necessarily, but to actual living arrangements. I mean, people are living in postage stamp sized houses, forced into this kind of situation. This is one of the irritants that goes with it.
So, Qingdou, what do you think of the two entirely different pictures we have about Hong Kong? One is the super rich guys, the elites, the other, a majority of the poor, who are still struggling, wrestling with the basic issue of survival, survival of the misery, survival of the decency. I mean, the decency is only enjoyed by the super rich guys, the elites. But what about those university graduates? Hong Kong used to only have a prestigious elite education. But with the enlargement of the recruitment, I mean, very much like the situation in the mainland, the moment you graduate, you'll face the issue of being unemployed.
That's right.
So they don't have the silver lining of being employed upward mobility is very much the issue and challenge.
I don't agree with you. I think Hong Kong is not alone. Obviously, the widening gap between rich and poor you can be seen in China, in the mainland, in the United States, and in many other places. So this is really a problem. I think Hong Kong government should take it seriously and to be creative, to try to narrow the gap between rich and poor, and really take into consideration of the plight of those poor people, of this, say, lower income people, and these young graduates.
I've been asking this question many times over, Hannah. What do you think of the readiness of the mainland to open our door to the Hong Kong young students? Come and join us, all right? We will provide the umbrella.
Yeah, this is the irony is that there are so many opportunities. I mean, there's good education. They speak English. They have knowledge about international affairs. They could easily get jobs on the mainland if they were willing to go across, but they're not. And here it is. They seem to think that somehow the Chinese government or somebody owes them the right to stay where they are and get the job and house of their dreams.
Look,
and that
Anna,
doesn't work.
Jindo and Anna, what about the impact on Taiwan? I mean, the DPP, the ruling party in the island, says today of Hong Kong will be tomorrow of Taiwan if we hand ourselves over to the mainland authorities. I mean, this is a very popular political slogan to appeal to the mind and heart of the young descent. I mean, these guys were the bulk of the Mayflower movement that occupied the Legislative Council of Taiwan, and they shared their concern with those student leaders of Hong Kong about their future. So, do you think this will be the real issue today?
I want to see it differently. I think, if you look at the Taiwan government right now, especially the DPP, they are embarking on a way of getting more and more, they're refusing to acknowledge the 1992 consensus. That's like one China. You can have different interpretations. But for the ruling party, obviously, they're embarking on a way of getting more and more independent of China. But of course, internationally, it's very difficult for them to achieve the goal. And especially with the development of the mainland, it is more difficult, probably. But they are using Hong Kong as an excuse to say, see, we should be independent of China because it's what's happening to those guys. But there is a misreading. For people outside Hong Kong, often they see this as like an issue of democracy. For this latest ruling, it's purely legal issue. It has nothing to do with democracy.
Well, I'm afraid the Nobel Committee in Oslo may see it the other way around. There's a likelihood for the three student leaders to be granted the laureate. Perhaps.
That's a suggestion by an opinion writer in New York Times.
Right.
Look, quite frankly,
and then relationship between Oslo and Beijing will decline again very sharply overnight.
No, look, Donald Trump could be nominated. It doesn't mean that he's going to win.
I'm afraid that prize would go to Ivanka.
At this point, yes. But, I'm going to disagree a little bit here. I think Taiwan is going to continue to look at Hong Kong and say, look, we cannot trust the mainland. We cannot. We have to go further away. We have to maintain our independence. And I think that is one of the casualties of this. But the difference is that Hong Kong, these protesters are in essence saying, we want two systems, not one country. You cannot say that I'm depending on this legal document, but I reject part of it, that there's somehow a reason why we can just diverge. And this is the problem. Yes. This is not Taiwan, but it will be used by them.
Probably these student leaders in Hong Kong have been brainwashed as if they were in Scotland voting for the independence, or those who supported the Brexit. Thank you so much for being with us on this edition of Dialogue. We are talking about the sentencing of three student leaders to 8 months because of their leadership in organizing the Occupy Central movement 3 years ago. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.